China's low-cost manufacturing economic model has sustained years of rapid GDP growth. However, it has run its course. Underneath the surface, China has long struggled to foster indigenous innovation, a trait of authentic modernized economies like Japan, Germany, and the United States. Beijing has been able to get by due to its massive workforce and the import of foreign technology, but as wages continue to increase at home and competition from other low-wage economies emerge, the profits of China's labor-intensive sectors are not what they used to be. More people live in the western rim of the Pacific Ocean than anywhere else, but the region's economy is off balance.
In the US, 37 of the 75 highest-earning counties lie in the northeastern corridor between Washington, D.C. and Boston. And 54% of startups are first financed in just 5 metropolitan areas. Trace the coasts, and there you will find the rich and powerful. China is no exception. The historic political capital of D.C. is Beijing. The bustling financial center of New York is Shanghai. And the fast-paced, innovative Silicon Valley is the southern city of Shenzhen. Together, Hong Kong, Macau, Guangzhou, and several other cities form the Pearl River Delta, one of the wealthiest and most vibrant parts of China, and one of the most important to the world economy. It's home to the 3rd, 5th, and 7th busiest container ship ports. It's where your iPhone came from, and where it will eventually end up.
All those people filling the megacities in the north have a shortage of the single most necessary resource for life: water. To solve that problem, the Chinese will soon be moving 45 billion cubic meters of fresh water each year from the wetter south to the drier north. There will be 3 canals in the project: a 716-mile-long eastern canal that will begin at the Yangtze River and snake uphill with the help of more than 20 pumping stations to reservoirs in Tianjin. Route 2 will flow downhill from the Danjiangkou Reservoir on the Han River, 785 miles across the North China Plain to Beijing. And the third route is the Big Western Line. It's still in its planning phase, but it will divert water from the rivers flowing into the Yangtze, sending it to the Yellow River instead. The central government has rammed this project through, despite many concerns over pollution and the forced relocation of hundreds of thousands of villagers. It's also late and over budget, due to the soaring costs of building bridges and tunnels for the canals to cross the many rivers and highways in its way. Then there are the very real fears that diverting water from the Yangtze River could cause the world's third longest river to run low, devastating those whose livelihoods depend on it. One proposed solution to this problem is to give the Yangtze more water by redirecting rivers in southwestern China. But this would affect India, Bangladesh, Myanmar, Laos, Thailand, Cambodia, and Vietnam, potentially causing an international crisis. For the immediate future, though, the South to North Water Transfer Project is a done deal. Following the example of the American West in the previous century, China has completely reshaped its environment using dams and canals, allowing for the arid north to support tens of millions more residents than it otherwise could. The marquee project is the Haiyang nuclear power plant in Shandong province, which will eventually house 8 AP1000 Westinghouse pressurized water reactors for a total capacity of 8,800 megawatts, 4 times more power than is generated by the Hoover Dam, a power station that provides electricity for 8 million people in the American Southwest. And when you factor in that the average home in China uses a fraction of what an American home uses, the Haiyang plant will end up producing enough electricity for tens of millions of people. But the $13 billion project is only the most powerful of the 13 different nuclear power plants currently under construction across China, 9 of which will have a maximum capacity of more than 6,000 megawatts. Most are near large cities, where power is needed most, but this strategy raises concerns that if there were an accident, tens of millions of residents could be exposed to dangerous radiation. The neighboring Guangdong and Lingao nuclear power plants have 28 million people within a 75-kilometer radius, including Hong Kong. That's many more than the 8 million who live within 75 kilometers of the San Onofre nuclear generation station in Southern California. But the decision was taken in 2013 to shut the California plant down, after numerous safety concerns became known to the public, highlighting the opposite directions the two nations are heading in when it comes to nuclear power. The other issue China must deal with is how to dispose of the many tons of radioactive waste it will be generating, which is always a contentious issue because no one wants that in their backyard. The current plan is for construction to commence in 2041 on a high-level waste repository site in the Gobi Desert. On the whole, the danger of a costly nuclear accident that China would pay for in both blood and treasure is fairly significant, but Beijing is apparently willing to live with that risk, judging by its unrestricted embrace of nuclear power. But these are tough choices, and it's important to keep in mind that in the age of climate change and ecological interconnectivity, nuclear power is still an infinitely cleaner alternative to burning coal. The final megaproject featured in our series perfectly highlights both China's ongoing struggle to maintain its unprecedented growth and the unbelievable ambition that's fueling its rise. A constant challenge for most big cities is that there's only so much land to build on. For Hong Kong and Shenzhen, two neighboring metropolises with a total population of nearly 20 million, the boundary it's running into is water, specifically the Pearl River Delta, which separates the uber-populated eastern corridor from the far lesser populated cities of Macau and Zhuhai on its western shore. Today, to get to Macau after landing at Hong Kong International Airport, you are faced with either a 4-hour drive around the mouth of the delta or a long ferry ride through frequently rough waters. But that's about to change, thanks to a $17 billion 6-lane multi-part bridge that will cut the trip down to a 45-minute drive. It is an incredibly complex project and includes cost and construction sharing agreements between mainland China and its special administrative regions of Hong Kong and Macau. Inspired by both the Chesapeake Bay Bridge Tunnel in the US and the Øresund Bridge that connects Denmark and Sweden, the Hong Kong-Zhuhai-Macau Bridge will not only have to withstand typhoons, but to avoid cutting off one of the world's busiest shipping routes into Hong Kong and its unusually deep natural harbor, it will plunge underwater as a tunnel. And at 28 kilometers, its longest stretch will be as if 15 Golden Gate bridges were lined up end to end to end to end. And that's not even the craziest part. Because Shenzhen doesn't want to be left out, it too will build a mega bridge across the delta just a few miles to the north. Basically, The region is booming so fast, and competition to tap into the cheaper land and labor available on the western side is so great that Shenzhen and Hong Kong have both committed to building multi-billion-dollar megabridges, and will essentially race to see who finishes theirs first. As you can see from a close look at the map, cities with populations totaling more than 40 million people surround the delta, thus revealing the master plan to lay the foundation for China's second megalopolis, an urban area that could eventually exceed 100 million residents. We started
This is symbolic of China's changing role in Africa. It not only wants to invest economically in the continent, but now also put money into important institutions like the African Union.
China's top political advisor Jia Qinling and Ethiopian Prime Minister Meles Zenawi at the opening ceremony.
We will have German.
This swanky new building, the tallest in Addis Ababa, cost around $200 million. It was a gift from the Chinese government to the African Union as a sign of their growing partnership.
As part of his trip to Zimbabwe in late 2015, President Xi visited a local wildlife sanctuary, Wild is Life, and saw some of the animals it rescued. Wildlife protection is a major area of cooperation between China and Zimbabwe. China has been working with African countries to strengthen their wildlife protection capacities through material aid and the exchange of expertise.
We're in the Strait of Taiwan. It's here that a military clash might one day break out.
Taiwan is one of those emotional hot-button issues, the way Jerusalem is to Palestinians and Israelis, the way Kosovo was to the Albanians and Serbs. And for most mainland Chinese, Taiwan is rightfully a Chinese province. This was territory that they believe was stolen from China by Japan in the 1895 war, and that the United States prevented reunification during the early stages of the Cold War because of our opposition to communism.
In 1996, here in the Straits of Taiwan, China and America engaged in their biggest military standoff. The ongoing elections in Taiwan annoyed the regime in Beijing, so the Chinese army decided to launch huge military maneuvers to test the Americans' reaction. After several days of this Chinese show of force, Washington deployed 2 aircraft carriers. It was the first time the two countries came face to face. For several days, there was extreme tension between the two nuclear powers.
When the Chinese fired short-range ballistic nuclear-capable missiles off the north and south coast of Taiwan, and carried out a major, what we call a live fire exercise. And Jiang Zemin was there, the president. They were using some very belligerent language. This is when we dispatched 2 carrier battle groups off the East Coast. And this was a show, this was force. And the matter quickly dissipated.
The Chinese thought this was excessive. They thought that they had an understanding with the U.S., that they would have a limited display to show their seriousness on the issue. The U.S. would adopt a very limited response, and then they would both back away. They regarded the deployment of a second carrier as excessive and in some ways as humiliating to the Chinese, because the Chinese couldn't do much to deter or complicate the deployment of those carriers.
I know this story well, and I can tell you that the truth is very different from the American propaganda. I was there in 1996. The Americans had promised to send an aircraft carrier to Taiwan for Election Day to protect Taiwan. But actually, the only American ship near Taiwan was the electronic spy ship Bunker Hill, and it was more than 200 nautical miles away. And the first American aircraft carrier was 600 nautical miles from Taiwan. So the truth is that the Americans announced that they were coming, but they kept their distance. They wanted at all costs to avoid any incident, and they didn't dare approach our army.
Even if the Americans didn't take much of a risk, in the eyes of the world, they reaffirmed a sacred principle of their foreign policy. They support Taiwan. And they will continue to do so regardless of China's growing power.
I think believes Taiwan is very important for a number of reasons, not to mention the fact that it's our 8th largest trading partner, our 6th largest market for agricultural goods. It's one of America's most important sources of high-tech semiconductor products. Even though they're imported to the United States via China, they're made in Taiwan. But that, of course, isn't the only thing. The real reason I think America has a commitment to Taiwan is because Taiwan is a democracy. It is, in fact, the most vibrant and dynamic democracy in East Asia. And it's a democracy that came to fruition under the pressure of the U.S. government, primarily the Congress, after 40 years of very tight authoritarian rule by a regime that came from mainland China. I think, however, the real reason that the United States, especially the Pentagon, is so concerned about Taiwan is that it has been a very strong defense and intelligence partner for the last 50 years, including the last 30 years since the breaking of relations with the Republic of China on Taiwan. We have still maintained a very strong defense relationship and a very strong intelligence collection relationship with Taiwan.
I would say the United States is committed to Taiwan. This goes back historically a long, long way. World War II, we were there. And we were looking for a strong, unified, democratic China. Well, we got 2/3 of it. Strong and unified, not democratic. Now we're calling China a responsible stakeholder. We've got half of it. We've got a stakeholder, but not a responsible one yet. U.S. feels that we have an obligation, legal, moral, to Taiwan, that we cannot stand idly by and let this be taken over by what looks like an authoritarian, communist-influenced power. This cannot be.
Taiwan, an island of 23 million inhabitants, 250 kilometers from the Chinese coast, is today the most explosive strategic issue between China and the United States. Taipei, the capital, flaunts its economic success. It is one of the biggest centers in the world for the electronics industry. A modern city, free, young, and always noisy. In 1895, Taiwan was invaded by Japan. 50 years later, after the Japanese defeat, peace treaties returned the territory to China, a China which was then in the midst of a civil war between Mao's communists and Chiang Kai-shek's nationalists. When the battle turned in Mao's favor, General Chiang Kai-shek, aided by the Americans, took refuge in Taiwan with his soldiers. Since then, two Chinese governments have coexisted. In Beijing, the communist regime that controls the entire mainland. And in Taipei, the nationalist regime, having become little by little a democracy, calling itself the Republic of China, which rules only Taiwan. Officially, these two governments both claim to be the legitimate representatives of all the Chinese. Taiwan is not recognized as a state by the UN. Only 20 small countries maintain diplomatic relations with the island. A fragile independence, while Beijing still considers Taiwan as the 23rd province of the People's Republic, a rebel province that the regime intends to reunite with the motherland.
I would say two major motivations. There are many others, but two major ones. The first one is national pride, unification of China. They are committed to this. This is a strong emotional drive in China, and you don't downplay it. It's real, it's powerful. The second is strategic. They know through history, if Taiwan is in unfriendly hands, that China is very badly affected.
At the end of the First Opium War in 1842, part of Hong Kong Island became a British colony. Later, China leased the rest of Hong Kong, the new territories, to the British for 99 years. By the 1950s, Hong Kong had become a busy commercial port and a manufacturing hub. As the end of the 99-year lease approached, Britain and China held talks on the future of Hong Kong. In 1984, a deal was reached that Hong Kong would return to China in 1997, under the principle of one country, two systems. As a result, Hong Kong has a high degree of autonomy with its own legal system and borders, and rights including freedom of assembly and free speech for the next 50 years. However, in recent years, Beijing has been treading on Hong Kong's rights. Artists and writers say they're under increased pressure to self-censor, and democracy has been limited. The current leader was elected by a 1,200-member pro-Beijing election committee chosen by just 6% of eligible voters. Throughout the spring and summer of 2019, large protests erupted in Hong Kong in response to a proposed bill permitting the extradition of fugitives to mainland China. Citizens worry the bill will be used to target, detain, and extradite political dissidents. Beijing's response to the protests has become increasingly violent as the citizens show no signs of backing down.
If you turn the globe around, and if you were the Navy commander of the Chinese armed forces, then you will see the only way to protect my coastline is to extend our defense and power projection capability far away from our territory. Why I need to do that? Because the economic center, financial center, education center, production center of today's China is all on the coastline. So the Navy's mission is to make sure that nobody touched this so I can continue to grow. To go out, you have a big stone right there. You can go other places, but there is a stopper, a stone blocking your way, and that's Taiwan.
Now, Taiwan depends on the outcome of elections that could change its executive power and stock market risks that can endanger its economy. Beijing, nevertheless, has understood that whatever the mood on the island, especially when it is favorable to political reconciliation, the strategy must never change. Imperturbable, the communist regime continues. On one hand, to offer Taiwan favorable business privileges on the mainland. On the other hand, it regularly reiterates its military threats. If the Taiwanese are too insistent about their desire for independence, they're going to have to fight for it. Whatever Taiwan's political tendencies, Beijing's position doesn't change one iota. A freeway in the middle of the island of Taiwan. In a few minutes, it has been transformed into a landing strip. The population watches this military exercise. They're used to it. French Mirage 2000 and American F-16 jets land and take off with an enormous roar. Faced with the uncertainty of American support, Taiwan organizes its own defense. Everyone knows that the airports will be the first target. Strategists on both sides of the strait affirm that the war will first begin with an air battle.
I think that experts the world over know that it's very difficult to succeed with an invasion. We still remember Normandy. In a strait like ours, it's what's in the air that will make the difference. And we've always tried to keep a strategic advantage over China, our air superiority. But with the Chinese missiles, this equilibrium has been put into question. They can destroy our airports, and if they are destroyed, we lose our only advantage over China, our air superiority.
Taiwan's military power is concentrated in its air force, but also in special ground forces. They are training to face the Chinese People's Liberation Army. In the event of a conflict, they expect elite Chinese troops to parachute onto the island to attack strategic targets.
Every Taiwanese people here knows that when the war comes, Taiwan is going to take the first bullet. We are going to take the first bullet, and probably we're going to take the bullets continue for about 2 weeks until a month, until that the United States coming. And there's no way that U.S. will come here to fight a difficult fight. If they really want to get involved, it's better for them that to wait when the Taiwanese people, we are wearing down the Chinese elite troops and give them the huge number of the sacrifice. And then the U.S. can come in and clean out the battlefield and win an easy fight. Everybody in Taiwan knows that.
In Washington, the scenario of the next confrontation is a constant preoccupation. They know that Chinese military power has increased significantly, but how the Pentagon will react in case of a new Taiwan crisis remains a mystery.
It's certainly not automatic, the support for Taiwan. It never has been. The United States has always maintained a policy of so-called strategic ambiguity, in which neither Beijing nor Taiwan can know clearly what the U.S. response might be under any given set of circumstances.
I think that 10 years later, from 1996, the missile crisis in the Taiwan Strait, to 2007, we would approach the Taiwan issue with a little bit more caution. We would approach the Taiwan issue with a lot more caution. What this means, I think, is that we would be probably resupplying Taiwan by air. We probably would put a active duty military contingent on Taiwan rather than risk putting our ships in harm's way.
As well as claiming disputed land, China has also claimed islands in the South China Sea. In fact, China has taken to dredging the sea and building out uninhabited islands such as Woody Island or the Spratly Islands to tighten its control over the region. 6 countries, the Philippines, Vietnam, China, Brunei, Taiwan, and Malaysia, hold different territorial, sometimes overlapping claims of the South China Sea, based on various historical accounts and geography. Adding to the tension, the U.S. Navy frequently patrols the sea due to its alliance with several countries. China considers this to be a provocation. The South China Sea is very important to Beijing because it's a crucial commercial passage connecting Asia with Europe and Africa. 1/3 of global shipping, or $3.37 trillion of international trade, passes through the South China Sea. Furthermore, the seabed is rich with major oil and gas reserves. The U.S. Energy Information Administration estimates the region contains at least 11 billion barrels of crude oil and 190 trillion cubic feet of natural gas. Also, the South China Sea is a vital food source, accounting for 10% of the world's fisheries. In July 2016, an international tribunal in The Hague ruled that China had no historic rights over the sea and that some of the rocky outcrops claimed by several countries could not legally be used as the basis for territorial claims. Beijing rejected the ruling. More recently, some Southeast Asian nations have considered having bilateral talks with China to settle the dispute. The Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, has been working with China to create an official code of conduct to avoid clashes in the disputed waters.
Company employees use a dedicated light rail system to move around the company's sprawling grounds. BYD has started laying out a similar light rail system in the city itself. Pan Lina has only worked at the BYD plant for a year. She moved to Shenzhen from the north of China to join a technical institute. She dreams of becoming a programmer and manages to reconcile her work with her studies. In the factory, Pan Lina is a quality controller on electric engine production. Electric engines and power cells are BYD's main signature products. On average, one charge is enough for an electric car to travel through all of Shenzhen from west to east. That's about 80 kilometers. There are many charging points on the company's grounds, so people don't have to search for one in the city. Every staff member is entitled to a discount on a BYD car. Pan Lina hopes that one day she'll buy one too.
我工作岗位的话会接触到比亚迪的所有车型。我喜欢比亚迪的唐，因为觉得比亚迪唐的话性能各方面的话都还挺好的，就觉得很喜欢。
Power for the recharging points is generated in the most environmentally friendly way possible: solar energy. The cars are quite literally charged by the Shenzhen sun, which shines here for almost 365 days a year. Almost every roof in BYD's huge production complex is covered in solar panels.
现在这个给这个车现在充电这一块，充电桩目前还不是很多，但是现在好像政府已经在大力的在给电动车这边在建设这个充电桩，可能也会随着这个时间的推进，充电桩会越来越多，然后给汽车充电会越来越方便。
By 2018, Shenzhen will boast more than 10,000 electric car charging points, all powered by solar energy. The city is a perfect example of how life has changed as a result of market reform. It's thanks to Deng Xiaoping, the architect of those economic reforms, that this megacity was created. Futuristic Shenzhen is very close to the Hong Kong border, and today the city's living standards have risen even higher than its neighbor. As recently as the early 90s, Shenzhen's population was barely 500,000, but today it's 30 times more, nearly 15 million. Almost every plot of land is taken up by offices or residential buildings. Parking for the city's numerous cars has become a major issue, but Shenzhen authorities have an innovative approach to solving the problem. Just a stone's throw from Li Chao's relative's house is a multi-story car park. It was developed here at the Chinese IT Innovation Hub. The Yifan company is quite old by Shenzhen standards. It used to make fans and industrial furnaces, but has now been developing new generation car parks for more than 10 years.
那当时为什么会进入这个停车这个市场？首先，我们是看准了汽车会进入家庭。那中国现在也面临的这个问题，中国现在有接近2亿个私家车的保有量。那真正规划出来的车位差不多接近1亿个，这些车会停放在哪里？哪里呢？它会停放在路边，停放在绿化道，停放在一些公共的场所啊，所以是非常影响这个动态交通。
There are now Yifeng multi-level car parks in many large office buildings, hospitals, and close to the most popular metro stations and parks. With a multi-level structure, one car takes up 1/3 of the space needed in a regular car park. For a facility that could have accommodated 100 cars, that's a big difference. Land is in short supply in Shenzhen. This system allows it to be used much more efficiently. Car parks like this are no big surprise. There are already several systems like it in the USA. But Yifan's unique development is that its third-generation car parks are robotic.
我们这个区域，现在这个区域就相当于一个车库的入口。当车开进来的时候，我们要先进到车库的入口平台上面，在平台上面停稳之后，我们就要进到我们自己开发的这个刷卡机 ，AGV 车库平台首先升起来，然后 AGV 就会跑到我们的出入口，把车接到一个空闲车位。AGV 会把汽车放下来，然后它就会跑到一个休息区域，等待下一次的存取的操作。
我们现在开发的一些这个信息化的系统，可以让驾驶员在，比如说我快下班了，那我就发一个指令，通过手机发一个指令，那他会预先去排队取车。当你预计我10分钟之后会下到楼下去取车，那这个系统这套电脑就会计算好，精确的把握好时间。当你下到电梯之后，你的车已经停放在出口的地方，